One phone call, $1 billion, and an entire country on its knees. On September 16th, 1992, one man made $1 billion in 24 hours, while the Bank of England lost everything. He had no army, no government, no printing press, no insider information, no illegal scheme. Everything he did was completely legal. And that's what makes it so devastating. He had a phone, a Bloomberg terminal, and a team of analysts who spent months doing something governments almost never do, reading the numbers honestly. His name was George Soros, and what he did that Wednesday didn't just collapse the British pound. It shattered the illusion that a government's promise is worth more than arithmetic. That illusion has been rebuilt many times since, in different currencies, in different assets. It's being rebuilt right now, in gold, in sovereign debt, in every market that holds its price through narrative rather than reality. This is the story of how it gets dismantled, and what you can do with that knowledge before the next one happens. To understand what Soros did, you need to understand what the British government walked into, voluntarily, confidently, and against the advice of some of its own economists. In October 1990, the United Kingdom joined the European Exchange Rate Mechanism, the ERM. The idea was elegant on paper. All European currencies would trade within fixed bands against the German Deutsche Mark. The pound's official floor was set at 2.778 Deutsche Marks. If the pound fell toward that floor, the Bank of England was obligated to intervene, buying pounds with foreign reserves to push the price back up. For 2 years, it held. Barely. The fatal flaw: the mechanism assumed all member economies would move in sync. They didn't. After German reunification, the Bundesbank raised interest rates aggressively to kill inflation. By 1992, German rates were at their highest in decades. For Germany, this made sense. For Britain, it was a slow execution. Britain was in recession. Unemployment was rising. The housing market had collapsed. What the economy desperately needed was lower rates, cheaper mortgages, cheaper business loans. But inside the ERM, lowering rates meant triggering capital flight from the pound, which would push it below the floor, which would force a humiliating exit. Trapped, locked into German monetary policy while running an economy that needed the exact opposite. The trap had a timer on it, and Soros knew exactly how much time was left. George Soros didn't wake up one morning and decide to move against a currency. This was months of preparation. His chief strategist, Stan Druckenmiller, had been studying the pound's position since early 1992. The conclusion was cold and simple. The math didn't work. Britain's foreign currency reserves were finite. The speculative pressure building against the pound was not. In a fixed exchange rate system, a government defends its currency by buying it on the open market. Every pound Soros sold short, the Bank of England had to buy. But Soros had access to borrowed capital at a scale the market had never seen. The quantum fund shorted the pound for $10 billion. $10 billion. When other funds saw the position building, they followed. It became a one-way trade. The downside for speculators was limited. Lose some interest if wrong. The upside was the full devaluation. The asymmetry attracted capital like gravity. On the morning of September 16th, the Bank of England tried to hold the line. They spent billions buying pounds. The pound barely moved. At 11 a.m., the government announced an emergency rate hike from 10% to 12%. The pound wobbled, then kept falling. By early afternoon, another hike, 15%. 15% in a recession to defend a currency peg. The market's response was contemptuous. The pound kept falling. Traders understood what the government was pretending not to. You cannot run 15% interest rates in a recession. The threat would destroy the mortgage market and collapse business lending faster than any currency crisis. An incredible threat is no threat at all. By 7 p.m., the Chancellor went on television. Britain was suspending its ERM membership. The pound fell 15% overnight. The second rate hike was quietly canceled before it ever took effect. Soros closed his positions over the following days. Total profit, $1 billion in a single trade against a G7 government in 24 hours. Here is where this stops being history and starts being today. Gold shares the same structural vulnerability as the pound did in 1992. Its price is held up not by cash flows or earnings, but by a narrative. And narratives can be dismantled by arithmetic. The gold narrative: gold is a store of value. In inflation, it protects you. In crisis, it's the refuge. Central banks buy it. The world trusts it, not false, but incomplete. And the incomplete parts are where the risk lives. Here is what the narrative leaves out. Gold has no yield. Holding gold earns you nothing. This means it competes directly with interest-bearing assets. When real interest rates are positive, capital flows toward yield. Gold stalls. That's not opinion. That's the mechanism. This is precisely what happened. The Fed raised rates faster than at any point in 4 decades. Real rates went positive. And gold, despite every geopolitical shock, every banking crisis, every inflation headline, went essentially nowhere. The narrative said surge. The math said wait. The math was right. But here's the part that matters now. The math is not permanent. It is conditional, and the conditions are beginning to shift. The British government in 1992 made a mistake made constantly by institutions of every kind. They confused the authority to make a promise with the ability to keep it. The Bank of England had centuries of credibility. It had legal authority to move markets with a single statement. What it didn't have was unlimited foreign currency reserves. And without unlimited reserves, the promise to hold 2.778 DM was just words. Soros understood that markets don't run on prestige. They run on capacity. The question was never, does the Bank of England want to hold the rate? Of course they wanted to. The question was, can they physically do it, given their reserve levels versus the scale of selling? The answer was no. This transfers to every asset, every era. When someone tells you gold will rise because central banks are buying, ask it how much relative to global supply. When someone says a stock will hold because the company has a great brand, ask what the earnings trajectory actually shows. The narrative is always emotionally compelling. That's why it works. That's also why it eventually unravels, because arithmetic is patient and it always reasserts itself. Soros put $10 billion behind his conviction and stayed calm while the chancellor panicked on live television. That calm came from one thing: knowing his numbers were right, regardless of how loud the official denials got. After the ERM exit, conventional wisdom said Britain was finished. In the short term, the humiliation was real, but the economy recovered faster than almost anyone predicted. With the pound floating freely, British exports became competitive overnight. The Bank of England cut rates for the first time in years. Mortgages became affordable. Business lending returned. By 1993, growth was back. By 1997, Britain's GDP growth was outpacing Germany, the country whose monetary policy Britain had been strangling itself to follow. The humiliation was real. The catastrophe never came. The most important lesson here isn't about currencies. It's about the difference between a structural correction and a genuine collapse. The pound inside the ERM was the problem. The exit was the solution. It just arrived through market pressure rather than rational policy, because rational policy was politically impossible. Soros understood this before he placed the trade. He wasn't just betting on devaluation. He was betting Britain's underlying economy was strong enough to absorb it. That distinction, structural correction versus genuine collapse, is the difference between buying during a panic and being wiped out in one. First, find the gap between narrative and math. Every major dislocation is preceded by a period where the official story and the underlying numbers move in opposite directions. The ERM story was European monetary stability. The math was Britain is running out of reserves. In 2006, the story was real estate always goes up. The math was millions of borrowers cannot repay these loans. Right now, where is the narrative loudest? That's where to look. Second, size must match conviction. Most investors do correct analysis and then take positions so small that being right barely matters. What separated Soros wasn't identifying the trade. Every sophisticated currency desk in London saw the ERM pressure. What separated him was sizing. When conviction was at 90%, he went large. Asymmetric opportunities require asymmetric commitment. Third, direction over timing. Soros didn't know Black Wednesday would fall on September 16th. He built his position through the summer and waited. The timing could have been off by months. The outcome would have been identical. Too many investors abandon correct theses because the market doesn't move on their schedule. The question is never, will this happen? It's, am I positioned and can I hold long enough? Gold's ceiling has a specific cause: positive real rates, a strong dollar, and no acute systemic panic. Remove any one of these and the ceiling lifts. 3 triggers. Anyone is sufficient. The Fed pivots into a genuine loosening cycle. Real yields compress, the dollar weakens, opportunity cost of holding gold collapses. Capital sitting in money market funds at 5% starts looking for the next move. Gold is historically one of the first destinations. Inflation re-accelerates beyond what nominal rates can contain. Real rates go negative. The case for gold becomes mathematical, not emotional. A systemic shock large enough to make institutions question dollar-denominated assets broadly, not a regional conflict, something structural. In that environment, gold moves from stalled to explosive in weeks. None of these have a fixed date. All 3 are live possibilities. Soros didn't need a date. He needed a direction and a position. That combination is available to anyone right now.